Hi, it's Jason here from Wildlife Gadget Man, and welcome to episode 7 of Project Wildpatch. Now, one of my favourite garden visitors, actually one of the UK's favourite garden visitors, is the wonderful hedgehog. But hedgehogs are really struggling at the moment. Their numbers have plummeted over the past 30 years for a variety of reasons, including loss of habitat, poisoning, road deaths, predation, the list goes on. But anything that we can do to help them can literally be the difference between life and death. Now, if you look online, you'll find lots of information about how you can make your garden hedgehog friendly. And there's one website in particular that I refer to a lot, and that's hedgehogstreet.org. They've got lots of useful information on there, and I've actually downloaded some information and created a checklist so I can go around my garden to make sure that it's hedgehog friendly. So let's go through it one step at a time. Tip number 1, link your gardens with hedgehog highways. Now, there's no point in transforming your garden into a hedgehog oasis if hedgehogs can't actually get into your garden. So we need to check to make sure that there's good access. And we do that by checking under fences or gates to make sure there's a CD size hole, about 130 millimeters square-ish, that a hedgehog can pass through. Now, in my garden here, I've got concrete gravel boards, but I do have lots of space, lots of gap underneath the gates here. So for tip number 1, that's a tick. Tip number 2, make your pond safe with a ramp. Now, hedgehogs are really good swimmers, but they can only swim for so long. So it's really important that we try and make our ponds safe. And we do that by providing a sloped edge or a ramp of some description. Now, my pond is really small. As you can see, it's the size of a bucket. Well, it actually is a bucket, but I've made a little ramp using a big piece of bark. So that should be safe for hedgehogs and any other little critters that may fall into the water there. But it's important, particularly in warm weather, to keep the pond topped up, because if the water levels drop too far and they can't reach the ramp, then it defeats the object of having it there. So we've got a pond, we've got a ramp, so that's a tick for tip number 2. Tip number 3, create a wild corner. Well, I've actually started that, as you can see behind me. Well, actually, it's a wild end to the garden. I've started to create different types of habitat, and some of those are going to be suitable for hedgehogs. It looks a little bit bare at the moment because I haven't planted anything in there, but I've got lots of wildflower seeds that I'm going to be sowing in the next couple of days. So that's a tick for tip number 3. The tip number 4 says deal with netting and litter. Well, we're not going to have any litter in the garden. I'm going to keep on top of that, and we're not going to use any netting. So that's another tick for tip number 4. Now, if you've got netting in your garden, you just need to make sure that you keep it off ground level a little bit, which will allow the hedgehogs to pass under, and hopefully they won't get caught up in it. Tip number 5, put out food and water. There's lots of different foods you can put out for hedgehogs. Meaty cat food is really good, not the fishy kind, more kind of chicken and beef, that kind of thing. Or you could purchase some hedgehog food. This is from Brambles, or we've got Spike's hedgehog food here, specially formulated specifically for hedgehogs. It's really important to provide fresh water. I'm just using a little ramekin here. Make sure you keep that topped up. And sometimes it's a really good idea to pop that food in some kind of enclosure to stop cats and other creatures coming along and nicking and eating the food before the hedgehogs get to it. So I've got a little housing like this that I pop the food under, and that seems to work really well. There are lots of other ways that you can do it, and if you search online for hedgehog feeding station, you will find lots of different ideas. So that's another tick for the checklist. Tip number 6, stop using chemicals. Well, we're not going to be using any chemicals in the garden here, so that's another tick. You should stop using chemicals in your garden too if you can, particularly slug pellets, because they can be really dangerous for hedgehogs. Tip number 7, check before strimming. Well, we've only got a little patch of grass here, so we haven't really got to worry about that. I'm not going to let it get that long, but if you've got a bigger lawn or a wild area where the grass gets really long, always checking it before you trim to make sure there's no hedgehogs or other little critters hiding in the long grass. So that's another tick. Tip number 8, be careful with bonfires. Well, I've got no plans for bonfires here, but if I did, what I would do is make sure that I checked it before I lit it. And one of the best ways that you can do that is to not put your bonfire, not collect all the materials in the place where you actually want to set light to the bonfire. So on the day just before you want to light the bonfire, actually move the materials from one position to the position where you want to start the fire. That's a great way to check to make sure nothing's sleeping inside. That's another tick. Tip number 9, make a hedgehog home, or make a home for hedgehogs. Well, I've done that on a number of different occasions, and I've got lots of different designs that I've used, and I've got one in particular down here beside me. I made this hedgehog home out of scraps of wood I had around the garden, and if I lift the lid up you can see inside we have a couple of little baffles there, and that just makes it a little bit more awkward for a cat to get in, for example. And as you can see here on the roof, I've made it a little bit different. I've made it into a planter, and I plan to plant some wildflower seeds on the top there. So that's a tick for Hedgehog Home. And tip number 10, become a hedgehog champion. If you visit the hedgehogstreet.org website, you'll find lots of information about how to become a hedgehog champion yourself, and there's lots of other resources on there about how you can look after hedgehogs, how you can encourage them into your garden, and lots of ideas of how you can inspire and encourage your friends, family and neighbours to become hedgehog champions too. So that's the final tick. Great stuff. I'm really chuffed with that. Join me in the next episode of Project Wildpatch, and I'll show you how I created this rather special bug hotel behind me.